Well, we are very excited to be with everyone today. We don't know how many of you are actually here, which is kind of part of the excitement. This is actually the first of the Temptime Talks. Um, I've done other Zoom meetings over the summer that were more of a um, creative aspects, but this is the first of the Monroe Talks. So I'm very excited to have with me today someone that I met maybe 25 years ago at the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce, Deborah Gavrin Frangquist. And we've known each other in several different iterations, but most recently we've been serving on the Job Forum of San Francisco, which is a wonderful organization that helps job seekers um, look at their resumes with interview tips, pivoting their careers, really wonderful. And you can find information on them online. And what I'm going to have Deborah do first is I'm going to welcome her. I'm really jazzed to be spending this time with you, Deborah, and looking forward to this. But why don't you do like a 1 minute infomercial, and we'll go from there.
Super. Thank you, Deborah. And yes, we have known each other in a variety of projects, including the Job Forum. So I am a career consultant and executive coach. And what I've always been most focused on is the overlap or the disconnection between people's work lives and their whole lives. I first started doing the nuts and bolts of career development at San Francisco State University, working with MBA students there. And I have continued to learn through multiple business cycles and new technologies. For me, COVID, working from home, and now back to the office as it is happening in a variety of ways. This is all the latest set of changes, both technological and social, that are affecting everything in our lives. And for me, and working from home has affected what we even mean about a workplace. So I'm excited to be having this conversation with Deborah and hope what we have to say will be useful to people who are navigating this set of changes.
Right. I think we often don't take the time to think about all that's happened unless, maybe we watch a podcast, listen to a podcast or watch something on the news. But I think just taking the time to have the conversation and to listen in on the conversation may be thought-provoking for people and maybe, steer us to make certain decisions or start thinking about certain decisions we may want to make. So I'm really curious to learn, employers and candidates right now are both wondering, well, first of all, if they're coming back to the offices, but let's say it is true that sorry, I have somebody coming in here. It is true that that COVID soon will be a thing of the past, we hope, and that we will be going back to the offices. And so, what can people expect, and what considerations are important to them when they're making the decisions about for managers about coming back to the office or helping people decide to come back or not?
Well, I'm not sure we know what people can expect besides a certain amount of confusion and a lot of experimenting, which we are all going to be doing. What's going to happen in a particular workplace is going to depend on the workplace itself, what's its physical layout, what are the needs of the work, what is the nature of the team. All of those things are particular to a workplace. I think the considerations, and this is actually true for employees as well as for managers, is what do you need in order for the work to happen at its most effective? And that at the least initially means rethinking how we do everything. We've already done that once or iterated it over the period of remote work, of pretty much everybody working remotely. Now we're not just reverse engineering that, but we're rethinking it. I read one of the many, many articles out there about what to expect when you come back to the office just in the last couple of days, which pointed out something I hadn't yet thought about, which is for people who were hired during the shutdown, these may be colleagues that you've worked with for a considerable period of time, but they come to the office, they do not know where anything is. They don't know where the break room is. They don't know where supplies may be. They don't know where to even look for people in offices, whether or not they're in the office that day. So we're going to be surprised by things like that, things we haven't thought of. So I think a combination of adaptability and looking for common sense, and I would say a sense of humor on the part of both managers, employees of, oh, look at that. We didn't think of that. Well, now what are we going to do, rather than letting ourselves become angry or frustrated? I think those are kind of key for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, more than ever, I think in this last year, we've all had to strengthen the flexibility muscles that we had, because every week there was a new twist or turn and an adaptation that had to occur.
Right.
Would you say that, well, has the pandemic accelerated a move to remote or hybrid employment? And what are the upsides of that and the downsides of more people working in a hybrid or working remotely?
So definitely it has accelerated a move to more and more people working remotely, at least part of the time. And I think it's accelerated many organizations moving to a remote first or an all remote approach. Some of that is technology. I mean, we do remember at least some of the changes that something like Zoom has had to make in the last 15, 18 months. This has been very, very accelerated. Scaling, but also adding features and tweaking features. And the same is true of other collaboration platforms, Slack, Microsoft, Teams and Hangouts and all of those things. I'm not going to try to name all of them, but all of the ways that people communicate with each other at work. And that both makes things simpler. It means that if employees are permanent employees who have moved somewhere entirely different, but you want to keep them, temporary employees for whom a daily commute from wherever they are is not attractive right now, one of the upsides is proverbially, you can get the best people wherever they are. And of course, another upside from the business side, if it's an office environment rather than say retail, is you may not need as much real estate. So those are both powerful incentives to keep at least partial remote work. On the other hand, some of the ways that companies have previously handled people being in the office only sometimes may not be appealing post-pandemic. Hot desking, people aren't so eager to be in space that's been intimately shared, even though we now know surfaces aren't the primary way. The flu is spread that way, and so is the common cold. And we're all more aware of that. The downsides are potentially, the two that I think of most are twofold. One of them is the close coordination and collaboration that happens informally. The conversations that happen in the break room, in the restroom, as you're arriving at an in-person meeting and you're talking in the hallway, or you're the few people there, the first few people there, the last few people, the leaving. Those are ways of getting to know each other and sharing. Sociologists talk about the informal organization. That's harder to replicate remotely. It's harder to communicate remotely. We can certainly train, teach, talk, post values, but how they're lived out is, to my mind, an interpersonal experience. mostly. And then the other possible downside that I'm particularly concerned about is over time. What does a company, an organization lose if its institutional memory is, yes, it's probably archived in Slack or Google Docs or someplace like that, but it's not being communicated person to person the way it used to be, has been. I think that's something innate in what it means to be human. The storytelling, I think we all we want to be efficient online because for one thing, we don't want to be staring at the screen all day. So I think those are some of the biggest challenges. And then of course, the other potential downside is just the complexity, at least right now, of figuring out who needs to be in an office, at least occasionally, who doesn't need to be in an office, and how do you keep the people who are remote and the people who are physically present on an equal footing, so to speak, in terms of input.
This is not a question that we prepared, but I've been reading a lot about on LinkedIn. People have been posting articles on like so many check-ins and so many meetings and all of this. And we have, when you say on the one hand, on the other hand, I feel like there's an octopus of hands. Like there's this, there's this, there's this, there's this. But in your career, like our careers are probably of similar length. Has there ever been anything similar that you've had to adjust to, or that you could see, I have no idea where this is going to be in 10 years. Like, how is this all going to shake out? And how did you handle that?
There's been nothing on this scale in our lifetime. And the workplaces, certainly of the flu in 1918, but also of, say, the Second World War, which disrupted, changed in many ways permanently the way work was done. They took place over longer periods of time in a very different workplace, and in a time when the only way to collaborate was in person or by the 1950s on the phone, but the phones were nothing like what we have now. Conference calls didn't exist even. So there's been nothing that anybody alive has lived through on this scale. There have certainly been local and regional disruptions. New York after 9/11, empty offices and people afraid to come in. Many parts of Texas, Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina, New York after Hurricane Sandy, things like that. It sort of paved the way, created some of the technology. Those companies affected by the World Trade Center who did have backup systems and could move their offices to their backup locations. But nothing with this kind of massive social change. And that, I think, is going to affect the experience of working in ways that, and of working collaboratively or working with many definitions of collaboration. But modern workplaces, mostly you don't own all of your work. It's in relation to other people's work someplace. So we're all part of a giant social experiment, totally involuntary, which is part of why I think a sense of humor, which for me is a big part of a sense of proportion, is an essential quality for managers. Humans love certainty. We want to know what's going on. And I think that's part of why meetings have multiplied, frankly.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean we know what's going on, but meetings in a way are kind of security blanket sometimes.
Right.
I was at the meeting. So I think it's a wonderful question, Deborah. I don't think anybody has answers yet. I think the best we can do is say, here are some things we should pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, I mean, I've been through several recessions, but recessions take a long time to set up and they kind of we come out of them gradually. And at least having known I've been through those is, gives me solace that the business has survived two or three of those. And I also went through, and you probably, my big hits were the Iran-Iraq war. It just felt like when that first happened, it just felt like everything kind of was at a standstill in business. And of course, then we had an earthquake in 1989. And yeah, it didn't take that long to recover and to have business come back to usual, but it was such a disruption in everyone's lives in so many ways. So
yes, but that I remember that vividly. But for example, for downtown San Francisco, it was a disruption for most offices that could be, the immediate disruption was only a couple of weeks. And then so one of the differences this time is the very when we first talked, even at maybe a year ago, about getting back to normal, we don't talk about that anymore. At least we shouldn't be. It's about recreating some kind of normal.
And it would be actually, it'd be sad if we went back to normal. So for managers, in other managers, leaders, entrepreneurs, in other economic times when the business was, your business was facing challenges, your role was to shepherd your people through. And I was recently at a National Association of Women Business Owners event where we had, breakout rooms, et cetera. And there was a woman who had a medium-sized company. And she said, half of my people are loving being remote, and the other half are looking, not exactly half, but are looking forward to coming back to the office. And so how do I, make it, what do I do to bring people back gradually, or do I have social events, et cetera? And my thought was, what's even more challenging right now for a manager, owner, entrepreneur type person is we have also been through this 16 months of seeing that, wow, I have more energy at the end of my day now because I haven't had to deal with a 2-hour commute or, sitting at my desk through meetings when I'd rather walk around and have a phone call. It's whatever. We have so much more freedom. Everyone has had more freedom.
Yeah.
So I think as a business owner, there's this inner conflict of, wow, I'm let out of jail free card for this, year. And now we still want to have the progress, the success, et cetera, and a staff that stays and is happy. And so I don't know if you can comment on, that rub for leaders, and also maybe comment on how do leaders manage themselves during this type of change, like practical things that we can do.
So yeah, you've put your finger on one of the things that is much commented on by pundits, by workers, by everybody. And of course, it's been a very different experience for people depending on their circumstances. People who live alone, many of them have felt very, very isolated during these 16 months. People who live in houses with very small children, elderly, needy relatives, have found that all the ways that they handled both their adult needs and their need for privacy and focus for work and the needs of their family just were upended when the shutdown happened. And what I hear from clients is very varied. I have one client in in New York. Her office is in New York. She lives in the Bronx. That's over an hour commute each way for her. And she works for a firm which is actually headquartered in LA. She told me about a funny conversation with her boss in LA, who just drives to work. It's only 10 minutes, but of course there's parking there. It's just remembering the circumstances that people are working with. So I think for managers, I mean, going back to what I said at the beginning, I think the most important question to keep asking yourself is what does the business require? What does the work require for someone in this role? That may mean something like in-person orientation and one all hands meeting in person for anybody who isn't super remote, like out of state, a week. And then you have to figure out how that out of state person is present on a big screen and can actually feel part of the meeting. But it may mean that only a few people need to be in-house, on site, on any kind of regular basis. And that, I think that may become part of the negotiation in job descriptions and job offers, is a much more kind of granular negotiation about what parts of this must be on site and can they be set up so that they only happen on certain days of the week. And then I think the question of, and how much discretion do I have over my time, is going to be another consideration. It depends very much on the position. A customer contact position has always meant you had to be there. Somebody needs to cover the phones, the chat, the whatever is the interface with your customers. That hasn't changed. How we do it may. If it's phone contact, if it's online in any way, managers need to ask themselves, what do I and this particular person need in order to be sure we're on the same page? We know what the criteria are, how they will be evaluated, how we will know they're doing good work. And I think there's a level of maturity required to recognize the way I used to do it may not have been the best way. That's hard for us as human beings to recognize. Even though we may know I was doing the best I could, but boy, I've learned a lot. So I think what I've always thought, which is a recognition of that every employee, in addition to being an employee or as part of being an employee, is also a human being, and is someone who may frontline people often have better ideas about what will make their work go better than a manager who is not, particularly in larger organizations. Smaller organizations, you can see, and that's an informal conversation. And in order to let ourselves, allow ourselves, encourage ourselves to be at our most adaptable and our most collegial, I think all the things that nourish us as human beings. I'm particularly an advocate for some kind of physical activity and physical practices. That can be yoga, it can be meditation, it can be running. We all collectively need to look at the fact that's not necessarily compatible with the ways we used to organize our workplaces, particularly offices, particularly in congested downtown areas. We're going to have to get very creative about this. But the key pieces, frankly, they're the tenets of every major philosophy, religion, any piece of wisdom, which is be present, see the humanity of other people, and pay attention to what's important.
Wise words, yeah. Yeah, what comes to mind is, there's also the fear of this unknown. So, we've had to change, or we try out a new way of doing something, and you have to just get on the train and check it out and see where it leads. But what's really important, I think, more than ever, is to remember what your mission statement
Yes.
is, what your values are, how you want the customers to feel, and how you want your employees to feel. But at the end of the day, when you are trying out new systems, new software, whatever, I think keeping that eagle view on what's really important is much more, I mean, is has always been important, but it gives you some confidence that you know, okay, whatever we do, this is what we're aiming for. And if it turns out that that newfangled device really is not leading that direction, is giving the opposite impression to the customers, the clients, the coworkers, then scratch. But
Yeah.
that's easier for me to say. I'm a small business. When you're a giant, when you're a container ship, you start these turns like 20 miles back. We can like, so
But for any size business, and not for container ships, but for a business, certainly to do things as pilots, as experiments. We're going to try this schedule for 30 days or 45 days, and we're going to evaluate at 20 days and then at the end of the 45 days, and to have feedback mechanisms so that people, I mean, we all know retention is a key question. The market for workers has changed. Many businesses are struggling to find people, particularly for on-site, because people don't want to commute or they've moved away. And so providing for feedback, it directly affects employee satisfaction. Therefore, it directly affects both performance and retention. And so I think the eagle eye view is essential, but there's also this, what I want to say is it's also extremely practical to have an eye on how long are we going to try this? How are we going to evaluate it? How do our criteria for evaluating it relate to our actual mission and values? And who are the stakeholders whose feedback we are seeking and incorporating in our decision making? I agree with you. We want certainty. We love certainty as humans, and it's hard to have been living without it for this long, and we're without it for quite a while. On the one hand, it's very exciting to be creative and adaptable and exploring the future. On the other hand, it can be exhausting. And so again, I think taking care of ourselves, as you say, you're not eager to give up some of the freedoms that you have had working remotely, because you see the value of them. I think that's going to produce some long-term social change, maybe more intentional than what we had in the 20th century as American workplaces changed, but they happened incrementally. And skyscrapers were just magnificent examples of progress. Well, they also have their own problems in terms of sealed air and all of that. Mm-hmm. So I think everything, small businesses, large businesses, need to be learning organizations now, and the learning needs to be shared among all the stakeholders.
Well, thank you. We need to be wrapping up. This half an hour has gone so quickly, Deborah. Right. Wow. So do you have any final thoughts or recommendations for our listeners today?
I think just to recap what we've already said, which is do the practical things. You need to pay attention to the details, but also make sure you're pulling back and getting that larger perspective. Not just, that worked for today. No, we didn't have a big mess. That meeting went well. That's important. But also, how is this serving the business in the long run? What seems to be the effect, and how can I engage other people in helping me figure out what's working and what needs some additional adaptation?
Yeah. And I'm reminded of how things were in the first few months of the pandemic. We were just reacting to
Yes.
what was happening. And then there was a moment, well, not a moment, but a time where we realized, okay, this is going to happen. This is going on for a long time. This
Yes.
is not, oh, we're going back to the office in 6 weeks. It's nothing like that. It's like
Right.
maybe 6 months, maybe a year. Now, so then we started looking then at what are our, what are we going to do? How are we changing it? Are we checking in this many times a day? What did I?
Right.
Now it's another point where, okay, time to sit down and really look at what's working, what could work better, and be open to this new hybrid situation. So all of us are, it's time for that. If we haven't already done it, time to do that again.
Right.
So
Right.
I want to thank you, Deborah, for being here today.
My
And
pleasure.
all of you that are watching, I hope this has been valuable for you. And I just want to say I'm the president of Monroe Personnel Service and Temptime. And we've been in business 36 years. And if this didn't stop us, I'm I'm so grateful for the clients that have worked with us this last year that continued to keep our people, some of our people working and are starting to really, we're getting busy again. So it's very, very exciting times. So thank you all, and to be continued maybe.
Yes.
We still have other topics we could talk about.
There are other topics, and we will learn more every week as we go,
right.
as we continue adapting. Thank you, Deborah. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye, everyone.